Hello and welcome to Health 2020 during Women's Month. I'm Dr. Salome Deu.
And I am Dr. Doreen Munakisi. The abuse of women by their intimate partners is one of the most forms of abuse facing women today.
Now, today we look at the psychological and physical harm that results from domestic violence and explore how the COVID-19 lockdown has impacted on the number of cases.
To give us insight, we'll be talking to an academic and an expert on gender-based violence. But first, Pindile, who's a survivor of domestic violence, shares her harrowing story.
Tsukufatso Pule, Altisha Koje, and her daughter Rainisha are some of the females who have lost their lives during the national lockdown due to gender-based violence. These are just 3 of the victims. The numbers are a lot more astounding. Pindile, a pseudonym to protect her identity, almost lost her life due to gender-based violence.
I felt so humiliated in the relationship, and I felt so belittled. The guy wasn't treating me in a good way, whereby I decided, you know what, I can't take this anymore. It's either you change, of which before that I gave him options that you change or we part ways. The day that he was stabbing me, I didn't take it seriously because I thought maybe he understood what I'm coming from. But he refused. You know, he just locked the door, got the key on himself, and he said, Mina now, today I never thought he would stab me. I saw myself just lying on the floor, bleeding. I was not myself anymore. I was begging for my life. The most injuries that he did, it's on my back, on my body, the back of my body, and on my lips, whereby I realized that he didn't want me to be seen that I'm living with this kind of a person. The most painful part is when you locked me inside, I was bleeding, remember? I was in pain. I was vulnerable. I needed help every way possible. And I begged him to open the door. When he opened the door, I ran to my workplace. Since Ngila Ekaya, I'm very cooled off because before I came here, I used to struggle a lot. I used to be in fear, even if when I meet somebody along the road, I would think maybe it might be him or he might be sent by him.
Shelters are equipped with social workers to help survivors make a fresh start.
We are facing a lot of challenges, especially now because it's lockdown, the cases are very high. Ama shelters awekho maningi asebenza nge-GBV, so ama numbers mawa high ngale ndlela, it's very difficult ukuthi siba accommodate bonke and sibanikeze uncedo bonke.
There are over 87,000 cases of gender-based violence that have been reported during the lockdown, but the situation on the ground is considered far worse.
Sithola ama referrals from churches, from police stations, from sometimes uzwa nje umuntu from a different organization athi sinomuntu so laba abaphezulu, they don't get to see and to understand about all those cases, but afika la kithi eground, of which akukho lula ukuthi afike le phezulu ukuthi babone, but the numbers are very, very high.
At the end of the tunnel, there's always light.
Sinalento singabafazi ukuthi siyaqolela ukuthi let us, maybe he has changed, maybe it's my fault. No, it is not my fault.
Academic researcher and gender activist Lisa Vetten has spearheaded South Africa's movement against gender-based violence for over 2 decades. Lisa, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Doreen.
To ask you the first question, please. How do you define domestic violence?
Well, domestic violence takes a range of different forms, and it's violence that occurs within a domestic relationship. So it will include couples who are just dating, and I think it's important that people be aware of that it covers dating scenarios. Couples who are living together, as well as couples who are married. It also includes situations where people have become separated from each other. And it covers both heterosexual relationships and homosexual relationships or same-sex relationships. But what's also equally important for people to remember is that it uses the term domestic. So it also covers a situation where you might say have a domestic worker or somebody else renting a room or living in a back room in the backyard and they're being abused by their employer or the person or their landlord. It covers those situations as well as if you're sharing a house and different rooms are being rented out and say the landlord or one of the other members is abusing you. Because it's the Domestic Violence Act, it also includes that within its definition of domestic violence. So it covers a range of different relationships and it addresses different forms: sexual, economic, physical, and psychological.
All right. Talk about psychological effects. I mean, we saw in the clip that, the emotional scars of this far outweigh or outlive the incident. Can you perhaps just take us through some of the, at least the most important psychological impact of domestic violence?
Probably its most important is the way it affects women's depression. We can see that I think women who have been in abusive relationships have very high rates of depression and anxiety, yes. And that it can become much more serious than that as well. We've also seen examples of women becoming suicidal, of developing more serious disorders that can sometimes be related to schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, and sometimes to the abuse of substances as a way of coping. So people often, as you say, because the external scars and marks have healed, they don't see what it does to you inside. And they also forget that domestic violence is not a once-off event. It's repeated again and again and again. Mm. And that is, I think, what causes the kind of long-term damage and harm of domestic violence.
South Africa ranks as one of the most violent nations towards women. Why do you think this is the case? What are the precipitating factors?
That's a very interesting question because our rates of violence are not just high towards women, they're high towards men as well. So I think there's some kind of relationship around masculinity and the fact that it expresses itself violently, whether towards other men or towards other women. I think we have a long history of the normalization of violence, the use of violence as a way of securing control, managing populations. It would be very surprising if it didn't translate into the way men, if they got treated like that by the state under apartheid, if that didn't translate into the way people then negotiated and managed their relationships. And people have also pointed to the way in which apartheid did a lot of damage, in particular to black men, in terms of never fully treating them as adults, but as referring to them as boys rather than recognition of men. So there are thoughts around how did the way masculinity was distorted in racial terms affect the impact of violence, and how did perhaps for white men who may have been encouraged to see themselves as being super masculine, how might that have translated into the very controlling relationships they had with white women? And then I think the questions people ask is, how have we reproduced that violence across generations? How and why does it keep repeating? And I think we do see that children who observe violence around them observe it in relation to their parents, and I think particularly for boys who often get abused by their fathers as well. How does it affect the way they grow up and the way they then learn to relate with others, male and female, when they become adults?
Yeah. We are going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll hear a special message from a very important guest, and as well as we'll be taking some of your questions. Please do not go anywhere.
Welcome back. We're talking gender-based or domestic violence with our special guest, Lisa Burton. Lisa, there's one important question that I think we need to address. I mean, as you saw in the clip, there's often an attempt to conceal some of the signs. What are some of the early signs that there might be domestic violence in any situation?
Very controlling and possessive behavior, wanting to know where you are and what you're doing, wanting you to spend less time with your friends, controlling your movements and what you do. And then I think somebody who doesn't like to be wrong, who doesn't like their point of view challenged, who wants things to always go their own way. And if you have a different opinion, gets extremely upset about it.
I'm sure we'll spend a bit more time on that. Now let's hear what well-known personality Rosie Motene has to say about women, especially survivors of gender-based violence, needing more support than they currently have.
Greetings, my name is Rosie Motene. I am a Pan-African feminist writer, activist, and I'm a survivor. Before COVID-19, our country faced an even bigger pandemic, and that is of gender-based violence. It was in 2018 that our president stood on stage and admitted to the fact that our country was in a crisis. So now we're faced with 2 pandemics. And as we learn our new way of life and learn ways of navigating through them, we still need to acknowledge and address the wrongs of the past. Some of these are how we support victims and survivors who speak out against gender-based violence. We need to change the way in which people receive the support, the amount of support. It is very, very important for healing through therapy, through counseling, through speaking out in a supportive environment. We need to understand that abuse has many effects on a physiological and a neurological level, and that often the support that's provided from a psychosocial point of view is often not enough. So as we move forward, we need to acknowledge that organizations and NGOs need extra financial support in order to cope during these difficult times. We need to change the narrative around how we protect and see perpetrators or alleged perpetrators. And we can only do this by addressing the problem and acknowledging that abuse is never the fault of a victim or survivor.
Rosie, thank you very much for that powerful message. During lockdown, some forms of violence against women have reduced in incidences. However, domestic violence has allegedly increased. I think it's probably best now we take some of the questions from our viewers. Lisa, if you can help us address those questions, please. The first one is, I am afraid to go to the police station because I might not get help. I might just have to go home again. Who can help me? And that is from Anonymous.
Okay, so the kinds of things that you can do, and this is the kind of thing that I've been doing with others during the lockdown, is contact an organization. They will, if necessary, phone the police themselves and issue instructions around what should or shouldn't be done. If you do not get the kind of help that you are supposed to get, then one must immediately approach the station commander, because in terms of the Domestic Violence Act, for the police to fail to help somebody in a case of domestic violence is actually a disciplinary offence. It's misconduct, and so they can be disciplined for that. So it's important that you contact somebody, including the station commissioner, and that it then gets taken forward. But get hold of an organisation so that they can intervene if necessary.
Very important there. So let's see what other questions we have. Zintla from Mabopane is asking, what is a sexual offence court and how do I get there? Lisa?
Okay. There are just over 90, there are about 93, but the number is increasing. There are courts that are dedicated to hearing sexual offences. So they're not just doing robbery, hijacking, housebreaking, theft, whatever. They just do sexual offences. They're especially equipped with one-way mirrors and other equipment in order to make the stress, in order to reduce the stress of testifying. You can testify behind one-way glass so that you don't even have to be in the same courtroom as the accused person. You will get special court preparation before you go and testify so that you can be supported and know how to answer the questions in a way that is good, that doesn't make the experience even more stressful than it is. And you will have prosecutors who've had some training in how to deal with sexual offences, and magistrates who have a little bit more understanding of the issue than somebody who's been dealing with everything and doesn't have a great understanding of the dynamics. So it's a much more specialised system, and because it's specialised, you don't have to wait quite as long for court dates. So it's an attempt to try to reduce some of the extreme stress of having to go to court.
The next question is, how do I report rape? And that is from Ginelwe in the Free State.
Well, you can go to the police station, but people need to know you can also go directly to a health facility like a Tutuzela Care Centre. There are 54 around the country. You can go directly there and they can call the police. I mean, if you don't necessarily want to report, you can still get health care. You can be treated for your injuries and you can be given post-exposure prophylaxis to prevent infection with HIV. So you have the option of just going to a health facility and reporting and getting health care treatment, or you go to the police, or you can call them and they can come to you. And you give them the complaint, they will then take it further and investigate the matter.
Okay, let's see if we can get to our next question. Karen Smith from Bloemfontein is asking, is verbal abuse domestic violence? That's an interesting one.
Yes, absolutely. If we look at the way the Domestic Violence Act defines abuse, it certainly recognizes verbal abuse and psychological abuse.
Where can I get counseling and advice from my sister? And that is from Nomsa from Zerust.
Well, at this point in time, there are a number of different telephonic helplines that she can call if she can't actually get to a service. But it is becoming more possible to go directly to a service. If she doesn't know what the closest one is, the helpline numbers that I know you're going to give at the end of the show will be a guide for her. There are those options. She can also look at websites if she has access to data and look at sites like the National Shelter Movement, which has shelters in every province. And again, they're attached organizations which can give advice, not just around psychological assistance, but how to report. They can also go with you to court to obtain a protection order or explain to you how to get that order and help you fill out the necessary forms.
It's quite helpful information coming through here. Let's see, we have a next question from Anonymous again, who says, how can I prove marital rape if no one else was there? Another interesting one.
There should be it's like any other case of rape where people are known to each other and there is no witness. You go and report, the doctors do the necessary medico-legal examination, they complete the J88, they talk about what kind of injuries they may or may not have discovered. And then sometimes, depending on the other facts of the case, you may also want to call expert psychological testimony who can come and explain about sexual violence within a relationship, why you may not have reported it before, how it may have affected you. You can also get a psychologist's report around the impact of this. And I must say, I have been part of cases where somebody was raped by her husband 9 years previously. They'd even lost J88, but nonetheless, we still got a conviction on that case. So it's very possible to be able to pursue a case of rape by your partner.
Well, the justice system is actually quite effective, isn't it?
It surprises you, sometimes not in a good way though.
I think, as we've heard, there are a number of conflicting ideas as to how COVID-19 has affected gender-based violence. How exactly has it affected domestic violence and gender-based violence?
Well, gender-based violence is an umbrella term that covers a whole range of different acts. So rape being one form of gender-based violence, I think certain forms of rape have definitely reduced under the lockdown, and those will be the stranger rapes that might have been committed while you were walking to and from your public transport, or while you were waiting for a taxi, for example, and rape in social settings, like on university campuses, for instance, or if you'd gone down to parties. We can see that that has definitely been reduced. Obviously, rape of children in households, we haven't necessarily seen that going down. In relation to domestic violence, I think we've seen some quite conflicting things. We've seen an increase in the use of some shelters in some parts of the country, but not in all shelters in all parts of the country. We have seen a reduction in reporting, but I think that's about barriers to reporting, about people being fearful that if they take public transport, when they go to the station, they might be exposed to COVID. Sometimes they get to stations, they're closed because of infection. We've also seen cases where women have gone to courts, and the courts have been closed due to infections. So there have been barriers to reporting domestic violence. So I think there's a great need to understand and do some research around what has happened under lockdown and how the lockdown may have altered the nature of the relationship and how it might have increased the pressures on some men to the extent that they behave violently.
All right. I mean, clearly there's a lot of useful information that is coming through. We're going to go for a quick break. When we come back, we'll try and put it all together, wrap up, and leave you with those very important messages that you can take home from this discussion. Please stay with us.
Welcome back. Here are the important messages from today's episode. We'll start off with the symptoms and impact. Some of the victims may present with physical injuries. Sometimes they may not be always obvious. Sexually transmitted diseases, especially if there's been a sexual insult. It could be unwanted pregnancies and as well as an abortion. Some victims may have poor overall health. Some victims as well may present with the psychological traumas associated with it. Some may turn to substances to numb the pain. They may also inflict self-harm. Some victims may have an inclination to turning to violent behaviors. Of course, with psychological traumas, we've got the mental and psychological impacts as well. You may have depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and as well as sleep disturbances.
And some of the most important issues to cover in today's show is how can you protect yourself? Well, have a friend or neighbor on speed dial for quick access. These are some of the simple things that anybody can do. Save those hotlines to your favorites on your phone. Identify shelters and places of safety nearby you. And there's a resource that you can easily get all the information that you need. And this is the National Shelter Movement. If you Google that, you can find that, all the information that you need about shelters. Identify your nearest police station, and that's very, very, very important. Now have a plan, in a place where you live, just have a plan for exiting the house in cases of emergency. Have an emergency kit with all the essentials that you require. And of course, tell your loved ones what you're going through if you're going through a tough time. Don't wait until you seriously hurt or it's too late until you seek help. Now, call one of the helplines. Seek care in a shelter. And as I said before, the National Shelter Movement will have all the information that you require. And report any case to the nearest police station. Now, here are some of those helplines that you may find useful. The SAPS emergency number 10111, the Crime Stop 086 00 10111, the Gender-Based Violence Command Center 0800 428 428, the National Shelter Movement that we've been talking about 0800 150 150.
That brings us to the end of today's episode. I'd like to thank Phindile from the insert, and as well as I'd like to thank Rosie Mutene, and as well as our in-house guest, Lisa Vetten.
Thank you, Doreen. Thank you for saying hello.
All right. And of course, we want to thank you as well. But before that, we just want to leave you with one other very useful resource. This is a Doctors on Call helpline. If you ever have any question that you want to discuss with a doctor about coronavirus or any other subject for that number, there's the number to call, 087 055 0234, and this consultation is free. Thank you so much for watching and contributing to this show by your questions.
Don't forget, guys, please send us your questions via SMS, WhatsApp, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and of course on the number displayed on the screen. From my side, please keep well, stay safe. Up until next time, bye from me.